lighting for theaters and television productions. And he's created many products used in lighting and lighting controls for several manufacturers. Majority of his career has been marked by successful design and consultation on many performing arts facilities, outdoor lighting, and notable award-winning architectural lighting projects. He's been very involved in many industry associations, and most notably of those, he's been president of the IES for a term and held 2 terms as president of the NCQLP. He continues to teach lighting and lectures around the world, and we are very lucky having him here doing just that today. As you may have just noticed, we just started recording on this presentation, so this recording will be available after the call today, probably tomorrow or the next day, indefinitely on our website. And Jody asks that you use the Q&A feature here at the bottom in order to ask questions. So I believe everyone is muted at the moment. So ask any questions you have either in the chat, in the Q&A, and I'll field them here. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Jody here. Jody, thanks again for being here.
Well, thank you, Andy. I appreciate it. Be sure that I get the link to the recording if you would.
Absolutely. We'll send it over to you.
Okay, great. So this is one part of a series of lectures I do on commercial lighting commercial realities for lighting designers. I've talked to many lighting designers over the years. They don't understand exactly how things get bought and how they get installed and who's responsible. So I've done this whole series of Light Fair and at other IES annual conferences explaining the roles of everybody. And there'll be a little bit of that at the beginning of this, but this section is really on how to hold your spec. And since I've been doing this for 30 years, it's, these are the tricks that I've made work, and hopefully they'll be of some use to you. So I can't stress how important it is to get your intentions on the drawings and in the specs, but don't expect a contractor or an architect to understand how to build a cove if you don't draw it on there and detail it. And the same thing with anything special about wall-mounted lights. Put the mounting height on. Do the same thing with down lights. Anything special you have to do with the down lights. Another very important thing is never approve substitutions verbally. And if you develop a reliable policy of never doing that, then 1 hour before bid day and somebody calls you up and says, but you said I could do this, you didn't because you didn't do it in writing. Bid time is a very busy time for everybody. And if you're trained yourself to never approve something verbally, I mean, you can approve it by email. It doesn't have to be necessarily with the agreement of the architect, but just don't ever do anything verbally, because then the contractor or the rep can't come back at you and say, well, you told me I could do this. Well, no, I didn't. And that's a very comforting position to be able to take automatically. We're going to introduce an issue that, or maybe not introduce, but we're going to discuss an issue of contractor allowances and unit prices to help you manage bidding and changes and getting what you want. And the importance of developing good designs and get a reputation for holding your spec. Now, I was a lighting designer in a large electrical engineering firm. We had over 100 employees, and I had partners that would let a contractor do whatever he wanted. So there was no holding his specs, but I knew this. I learned it the hard way, and I knew this. And so when I would work for this, with this particular partner of mine, I would go over my specs with him so he would understand why it was that he just couldn't let the contractor do whatever he wanted to on my portion of his jobs. Now, he used to be a contractor, so that's kind of why he felt that way. So what makes a successful project? Loads of expensive luminaires, maybe generous design fees. But I really think that a successful project has a better solution for lighting, a profit for everybody. Now let's talk about that for a second. I believe that there are times when the economics of the job allow overage. The reps will tell you at the end of the day that they really don't get to keep the overage. They use it to take care of the project, because it's like anything that's market-based. If you allow the market to set the price, there's a reason that that's where the price is. And if the people who are bidding the job and dealing with the distributors and the contractors see that there's an opportunity here to cover some errors or something that's been forgotten. I mean, I've had contractors forget to bid the parking lot lights, and those just lead to problems for everybody if you don't deal with it. But most importantly, you've got to meet the owner's objectives in order to justify a professional's involvement. Now, I think that the owner's objectives, we'll talk about that a little bit, but you understand how the owner talks about programming and all those phases. We got to be sure those are right. We got to be sure that the budget's right for that. But if you go by most, if you go to Dodge and all the other people that survey the construction industry, you'll see that most lighting is designed by contractors than any other group. And those contractors aren't going to have a ton of initials after their name. So, you know, reps and architects and contractors can be qualified, and to do their job well, they should. But if you want to use a lighting designer, you're expecting to get something better. And it may be knowledge of the industry. It may be more creative design solutions. It may be unified with the architect's needs or the owner's needs. So we've got to understand that the owner's electing to use a lighting designer, the architect electing to use a lighting designer, is for a particular reason, and we've got to justify our existence. Isn't there an oath? All of us that are lighting designers, don't we promise to use our in-depth knowledge of lighting, lights, and human factors with time and talent to deliver suitable lighting solutions? Well, it's not really a perfect world, but that's what we try to do when they hire us as a lighting designer. And I wouldn't say that contractors or architects or interior designers or anybody is trying to shortchange any of these things, but we bring it together better. I think lighting designers do, but we've got to understand how the whole job works. So here's all the people in a job. The developers, the specifiers, the contractors, manufacturers, the wholesalers, and the owners all have an interest and all have a financial stake in the job. Let's see here. So let's talk about owners and developers a little bit. They're really interested in getting a good job for the right budget. We'll talk about that a little bit more, but their view is of one perspective, but they are the ones paying the bills. Specifiers, now I didn't put interior designers in here, but I should have and could have, but architects, engineers, lighting consultants are all, their role is to specify products and unify them together. The general contractors and the electrical contractors' job is to build the stuff. The manufacturers, they've got a sales force or independent reps, and they're all interested in providing a product and then getting the price right at bid time. And the material wholesalers or distributors provide a very valuable service for helping manage the delivery of the products to the job site. And the contractors have to schedule everything to the material wholesalers, who then communicate it to the factories. So it all gets there at once. And a lot of times that can be a daunting job. So a lot of times you can look at the owner's interest in as what it is at the end. So they want to take with the initial and first cost and understand it, but it's got to be installed and working. They may have a great big department that takes care of their maintenance and operations, and they may have an opinion. I know when I do a lot of hospitals, I meet with the nurses and the maintenance people, and they are guaranteed to tell you what works and doesn't work for them. And then there may be tenants. If it's a spec building or a core and shell, there could very easily be not known tenant criteria. So we've got to put in what we need for the public spaces in the exterior, perhaps, and not preclude anything like cove lights or special lights for any particular tenants. And then if there's special considerations like LEED or advanced energy guidelines or something like that. I will tell you that as a lighting designer, I have developed a perspective that I'll charge $1,500 fee for every point attempted for LEED. It's just necessary. There's that much work in LEED anymore. At the beginning, we gave it away, but now it really, you got to charge for it because to do it right, it takes quite a bit of time. Specifiers' interests. Architects, they want to be sure that the function and the design are realized. The owner's function is delivered and they meet the budget. Engineers are also they care about all that other stuff, but then you get code compliance. I know a lot of architects, you talk about the energy code, at least until very recently, until the energy code became part of the building code, they didn't even know so much about it. But engineers are responsible for the code compliance and the design integrity. And when you submit plans for approval, that's where the AHJ will approve it. And then the lighting consultants, you have to deal with the requirements of the occupants, the design realization and energy objectives, all of it. So there's a lot of that a lighting consultant does for an engineer and an architect that the engineer and architect will be sunk if we don't get it right. The contractor is really interested in delivering the building for the bid amount. Hopefully that's budget, comply with the requirements of documents in the most economical manner. And they're pleasing a lot of masters. They're pleasing the architect. The architect's going to care about the stone and the wood, and we're going to care that the wall's flat because we've got wall grazers on it or something. And the project, for instance, and then we've got to manage the project to the contract schedule. Because after all, the building's being built for occupants and it's got to be done so it can be rented out or occupied. I've delivered jobs where I've had buildings be delivered before we were ready. For instance, I did an office building one time that had the controls had not been set up. So I got in there and it was an office and the occupants had put newspaper and tissue paper around the pendant mounted linear office lights because it was too bright on them. Well, they were all supposed to be dimmed, but the controls weren't working, so they weren't dimmed. So the occupants of that building were never happy. We had to go in and do a complete relamping, change the color temperature, so it would appear that they all had been changed to address their needs. And the owner knew this. They asked us to move in early. It was a problem, but that's how we solved it. Manufacturers, well, of course, they want to provide products. Hopefully they're the ones that are approved and preferred. And then they want to be low bid. They want to be positioned to get the orders without mistakes. Now, between the approved products and the low bid, there's a teamwork between the manufacturer and the local rep and the wholesalers. They all have to be working together. I know they team up and they'll try to put together packages, and we'll talk about that a little bit more in a minute. The distributor, if you're a lighting designer, you may not actually understand what the distributor does for the job. but they support the contractor. They provide material, they provide the lighting fixtures, the lamps, the poles, the pipe, the wire, the switchgear, the breakers, and all the control and miscellaneous equipment. They manage the paperwork, they manage the submittals, the releases, and the returns, and they often finance the material for smaller contractors. But they feel like, and they actually do add value, they're not just the banker. I don't know why I'm coughing. Anyway, I ask you to forgive me for that. But anyway, distributors, if you get a really good distributor project manager, then the stuff will show up on site just in time. It won't be put into a Connex storage unit by the contractor and get banged around. It won't get opened up every time they want to look at it and see what it is. So a good project manager on a distributor can earn their keep. And I always like dealing with them. And I got to the point where, at least here in Salt Lake City and in Boise, I got to know the distributors, project managers, and they would actually assign jobs. Of course, most of mine in Boise were theater, but nonetheless, it was, they would assign it to somebody that was capable of doing that. Down in Phoenix, where we have an office, I had no relationships with the distributors, project managers. And so I just got whoever they had. So let's talk about the money for a minute. How is everybody paid? Well, the owner gets their money from their budget. They've got deals with bankers or tenants, and they determine the budget for how it can be, how they can afford to build the building. The design team is paid by the owner through fees, and interior designers and lighting designers and specialty designers, kitchen designers and so forth may be hired by the architect. They may be hired by the owner. So the contractor is paid by a bid. Now, a lot of times architects will have a deal with a contractor to bid their jobs. And if you have three bids and you take the low, that means two people bid your job and didn't get the job. Well, there's a limit to how much they can afford to do that. And so don't expect, unless it's a bad economy, don't expect 7 people to bid your job. But you go through, we'll talk about it and try to pre-qualify them, call it to their attention. The distributors make margin, so they buy and sell, and the contractor pays them. The manufacturer gets paid by the distributor from the contractor, and the sales reps get commissioned from manufacturers. Now, I don't know who I'm talking to tonight, so I'm bound to offend somebody here. It's something I say. I like sales reps that work on commission rather than ones that work on margin, because I think the reps that work on margin have got less of an interest in seeing that the whole job is packaged together or works together. For instance, you could have color temperature problems with lamps, for instance. Now that doesn't matter so much anymore because it's embedded in the catalog number, but it can be wrong. It really can. So here's how everybody's paid. So do you notice a pattern? Well, what it means is that eventually it's the owner. So before we go on, I'm going to ask if any questions have come up. Everybody understand these roles? Andy, you got any questions waiting there for me?
No questions yet. Pretty quiet group so far.
Okay, well, that's good. And maybe I'm putting them to sleep, but probably not. It is dinner time, so maybe they're, having their wine and not paying any attention to me, but I could forgive them for that,
No, they're paying attention. They're in the comments here saying you're doing a great job. Really appreciate your time here. Thanks, Jody.
Well, let's look at how this works. So if we understand people's roles, we're going to talk now about how to work with these people in their jobs. Now, if it's a specifier-led project, which most of them are, we call them spec bid build. That means that the architect's leading the job. It's being specified bid to multiple contractors and then built. The budget is the cost guideline. So you have cost estimates at every stage. Costs are an estimate until the project is bid. Guards against program creep to contain expectations to avoid budget busters. And it encourages full, fierce competition at bid time. Now we're going to compare this to design build in a minute. But what you have to do when you're doing this, when you're going, pardon me, when you go this way, you have to be sure that the budget is right. And I'll stress that even more in a minute. So if it's in specifier-led projects, the owner's in a difficult position to say no to their staff to contain program creep, but it's their job. So the owner has to tell an office or a school or, that this room can't be changed from a classroom to a lab, or this room can't be changed from an office to a conference room because it deals with with program creep. They're increasing the expense. Often the budget is insufficient, resulting in over budget situations. But if you're on top of it early on in this situation, then you can deal with it. Contractor loading at bid time is a serious consideration if there's any ambiguities on your drawings. So if you don't know what you want, show something, so the contractor's not guessing. One of my tricks was if I had a problem with an architect or an owner, for instance, in churches, I always knew there was going to be art lighting somewhere in the lobby or somewhere out in the sanctuary or somewhere in a hallway somewhere. Somebody would donate money after the fact to put in art. It just happens on all these churches. Well, I couldn't say allow $20,000 for future art lighting. They would immediately value engineer that out. So what I did is I would put in a whole lot of extra wall sconces or track lights, track heads or something. So everybody was bidding it. It was the same all over, but yet I could take those out when the time came, and the architect and the owner would be thrilled that we had anticipated their need. But if you're you got to watch out for this devaluing engineer ideas. Value engineering, I mean, I hate to say this, but the state of Utah has got it built into the law for public buildings that there's got to be a value engineering review by a cold team. And that means an architect and a contractor that isn't bidding the job. And I hate to admit that it's in the law, but I guess it's to make sure that there's a check on the design team. But the fact is, it assumes that every job the cost can be lowered on every job. And the fact is that if the architect and the consultants have done their job right and are meeting the program necessities of the owner, then it's not going to be overloaded. Now, lighting designers can fall into this problem by over-designing it. Now, I just admitted that I over-design, but that's strategic. A lot of times you may be asked to design something too fast. You may be asked to do something in a completely outrageous time, like over a weekend. I can't tell you how many times somebody's called me up and said, change the lobby or change this or that or the other and do it over the weekend. That's brings me around to one of my favorite pet peeves, which is when manufacturers have passwords on their websites that I can't get to the stuff that I need on their website in the middle of the night or on the weekend. So anyway, so we've got to have the necessary design team time. I mean, we can put our ideas on paper, but they don't really work till they've been coordinated with everything else too. If you can be over budget or have a bad cost estimate. Now, in my analysis of design build, I will say that since the contractor has to estimate the job at DD and at a review stage, they're throwing money. They're guessing at what our mind is saying. So that's another reason why I believe that the design build doesn't necessarily get you good budgets. So you get a bad cost estimate and then you're over budget, then that can cause a problem for the lighting designer. I believe lack of competition is a problem for the lighting designer. But all of this rolls up into misunderstanding with the client on expectations. So we'll talk about that. Let's see here. Now, this is everything I just said. So if we clearly understand the scope, the program needs, the budget, the codes, the coordination with other trades, then we can get a good design. We've got to understand the targets, the goals, and the budget. If it's over budget, then it's got to be probably because of miscommunications regarding funding, scope creep, or troubles at bid. If you've done your job, then you can look outside your walls for problems in these three areas. And I think that it's an interesting problem to to try to tell the architect that this happened a lot of times. When I would deliver a lighting calculation to an architect, let's say that I'm doing in the state of Utah, in the state of Arizona, I have to do lighting calculations for every space. And I would send it to the architect to begin with, telling him the lights that I wanted to use. And this is whether they're office lights, down lights, or cove lights, or whatever. I would say, this is what I'm planning on doing in this room, since you haven't gotten to the ceilings yet, and you certainly haven't gotten to the room finishes. So my DD, my very first submittal to them, that the contractor is going to quote or try to quote, or I would always take it and specify the ceiling height, the ceiling finish, the depth of the plenum that my deepest light required, and the color of the walls. And I would hand this to an architect, and they may not have ever even shown this project to their interior design department yet. And they'd wonder why I was doing all this. And I would simply tell them that I was making sure that they didn't put purple tile in the bathroom and soak up all the light, because I have to deliver 30-foot candles by the National Health Code for cleaning in behind toilets and bathrooms. It's a lot of light, but it's necessary for being sure that it's clean. And health departments measure that. And if they put I'm depending on a 70% wall reflectance, which all of you know is a fairly generous reflectance. And if they put purple tile in there that's got a 20% reflectance, then I'm sunk. And they want to know why there's not enough light behind there. And in hospitals where they're really having to measure the light, I would always have the ability to up the wattage of the lamps. And when it was compact fluorescent or that sort of thing, it was easy to do that. Now with LEDs, it's not easy to do that. It's you're designed with you're stuck with what's designed and put in the ceiling. And of course, it can happen where the lights you specified that have the lumen package and the distribution that you need would fit the ceiling you designed, but the contractors decided to shrink the plenum by 2 inches to cheapen his steel, or to give the mechanical contractor a little bit more room in a plenum for a duct. We're sunk again. Or they're going to decide that they want to run the duct down the middle of the corridor instead of on the side, and we want to put the lights in the middle. Now, fortunately, Revit has done a lot to overcome these coordination issues, but sometimes at DD, you don't get the structural engineer's Revit package in time to send your drawings to the architect. So the architect gets everybody's file and merges them, and all this stuff starts colliding. I mean, if the design team can't get it right, then how can we be critical of the contractor paying somebody to go through and look for ceiling problems. So we have to understand this and communicate it. I've talked about scope creep. We can't change the rooms of it. And troubles at bidding. That's why I think you don't want to ever get into trouble of verbally approving something. And we'll talk a little bit more about that. Now, the designer can make all kinds of mistakes. We can ignoring the budget, feeling that the excess will be funded. I mean, you can talk to the owner, and if the architect's not in the meeting and taking notes, the owner can very easily tell you that they want to go with real glass in the bowls or the chandeliers or the pendants. They can tell you they want to go with mica. They can go with some very expensive finish instead of acrylic. They can convince you to use $2,000 wall sconces, which are very expensive. And if the architect isn't there taking notes and feeding that note back to their cost estimator, then there's a problem there waiting to happen. One name specifications can cause a problem. There is justification for one name specs, but there's a way to manage it. You don't want to create an opportunity for one-sided packaging by a lighting rep. I don't mind packaging, but I want to have at least 3 packages, but I'm not going to accept stuff that's not good to give the project 3 competitive bids. So we've got to have 3 reps or more with perfectly legitimate and acceptable products. And if we turn down a job, if we turn down a package because they don't have the right finish or the shape or the lumen output or thing, your relationship with the rep has got to help them understand that that's important, and they're welcome to try to find one until the end of the last addendums. But they've got to understand why they've been rejected, and they can't just go to their distributors and contractors and say, well, bid it, we'll get it approved. Well, that may or may not happen. Depends on how strong you are on understanding your job and holding specifications. And I will talk a bit about a unit price bid form. I've been very successful in doing a unit price bid form. So what I do is I communicate with the design team and the owner, explain why you're using a particular luminaire. If the architect is in control and they want this lobby to have a $2,000 wall sconce on each side of the elevators, as long as they put it in the budget, you'll be happy to put it there, and you'll be able to use that as your basis of illuminance calculation. And that's what the interior designer will do to coordinate the color coordination for the facility, for the room. But if you open yourself up and the owner doesn't understand why that expensive fixture in there, you've got an opportunity there to have to take something that you didn't really want, and you know why you put it there. You know that it was performance or requested by the architect or the owner, and it's a problem because these value engineering attempts, the owner, if you get to value engineering in a project, the owner's looking for money. They're not looking for the same sort of project that they ask you to design anymore. Actually, they are looking for exactly the same project, but they don't want to pay what the original request cost. So you need to communicate with the owner and the architect why you did this and get them to agree to support these expensive fixtures, or maybe double the number of track heads if the energy code will let you. And then you want to be sure that all of these decisions that are made in design meetings make it to the cost estimate. And then I say this will inoculate your projects from the most substitution of value engineering attempts with the owner, which is, of course, the final opinion. Now, I think that we're in a point in the market today that we have a lot of commodity products that used to be specification products. And part of the reason is that LEDs are downlights and strip lights and suspended lights and all the sort of commodity lights, troffers that we're into now. are fairly simple to build. The people that manufacture these lights, the tin vendors, so to speak, and the guys with the metalworking machines and the paint lines, can buy a lumen package, an LED lumen package with predictable optics. And so they don't have to have an optical lab as much as they used to. They're not going to put together a luminaire and then try a bunch of different LED packages there. They'll buy the one that they think they want to use, they'll put it in, and they'll get one fixture tested. And they'll sell that fixture for a commodity price. And that's a little bit of a problem for lighting designers unless you understand it. So if somebody comes to you and says, well, this is a 2000 lumen 6-inch downlight with a 3000 Kelvin, you've got to do a side-by-side to decide whether the cutoff angle is really what they say it is, whether the depth is really what they say it is, because there's a lot of people making luminaires, and I'm not trying to belittle their creativity and their innovation, but a lot of them may not understand the need for depth of in the plenum, or the need for a self trim, or the need for built-in dimming, all kinds of things that you may put on your job, you understand and you ask for, and you specify products to do it. But if a rep comes to you and says, I want you to substitute on this downlight, or I want you to use this different office light or this different troffer, you've got to do a side-by-side, and you've got to understand why the differences matter on your project. If not, then you should approve it, because it could end up saving the project some money and letting you have the $2,000 for those wall sconces. Now, another way of dealing with managing your bid is allowance prices. So there's always lights that you or the architect or the owner wants to be one name. And I've developed a pretty successful way of doing it. And what I do is I do an allowance price, and I let the contractors and the reps all know that it's going to come. In the last addendum and in the base documents, I've noted that it will be there. We put in an allowance schedule for luminaires that have not been, no other product has been approved. So we've got a bunch of one-name specs with their catalog numbers, with their dimensions and their weight, so the contractor knows how to install. I mean, they're not the catalog number, with the physical description, without catalog numbers, with the physical description of the weight and what it takes to install it. But to get there, I always circulate my fixture schedule in advance. And then I ask the reps to all get me what they want to submit for consideration before the last minute. And I'll go through, and that's when I'll do this side by side. And that's when we'll decide what was appropriate for the project. And then, it works a little harder when it's a distant market. I didn't have any trouble doing it when I was doing work in Grand Junction, but I had a lot of trouble doing it, say in Albuquerque, for instance. But I called the reps up. My activity in IES made it so I knew the reps, or knew some of the reps in these towns. And I would call them up and say, I've got a job bidding at this college. This is what we're going to do. And so here's my basic fixture schedule. You're free to submit on anything you want me to consider. And I will consider one more submittal from you. If I reject your first submittal, don't insult me by submitting on your own project, or your own products, just because, for instance, I don't want you to submit an Atlantic downlight against a Prescott light downlight, because I know all you're trying to do is lower the price. And I want the performance of what I specified as a base product. Now I'll issue out a fixture schedule with all the approved products, and then I'll come up with this allowance price schedule for all the products that haven't had competitive bidding, products approved. And I always make sure there's 3 because commercially everybody expects there to be 3 equal products. I wouldn't approve 2 because that just kicks the third person off. They just won't be able to get the job. So I require the unit prices to have the manufacturer listed. So after the fact, the successful reps can't start substituting on their own project. I don't want the low contractor to start shopping the job. And I go through all this with the owner and the architect so they understand how this works. And if we do have to value engineer the project, then this allowance price list lets us know what these products cost and what we can do with them. I don't like this top one, but I've had to do it. I have arranged the pre-purchase of lighting by the owner, and I charge for that service. I'm not going to deal with the helping a distributor buy it and ship it to the owner and store it and catalog it and identify it. I'm not going to do that for free. So if we're going to pre-purchase lighting, I will help them to do it. I have found my most successful of this has been on a big site. We did a big shopping mall with a lot of decorative fixtures, and I didn't want any substituting on them. My most unsuccessful one was where I got drug into it by a good client who was doing a 3 office insurance facility office and a 3 occupant office, I guess we call it. And I just killed myself with all the lighting in that office. Now, on this markup for the job for the unit price list and then the allowance prices, I get a price from the rep and mark it up according to what I believe the job needs to be. And I'll discuss it with the distributors and the owners so they understand what I'm doing. But I really don't think specifiers should be tempted to act as lighting distributors. It alienates the distributors and it can lead to you just taking so much time. It just is terrible. And it's really tempting to become a lighting distributor so you can get the products you want. I've done it for all the wrong reasons, and I've never come out ahead of it. It's just something that I would eat. It was something that I would be happy to do it for the owner. And it's something that I would say, not again, please. So I believe that you really need to do the job you're being paid to do. Stay in budget. Understand what you specify. Do your own design and computer modeling. Reps are so stretched today. Their commission income is being pushed down really, really low. So if you don't know how to do your own computer modeling, you need to go to Lightfair. You need to learn how to use the programs that are available, and you need to do your own computer modeling. And I would suggest that don't just depend on what Revit does, but understand what's going on so you can spot a problem if you've got, say, a wrong reflectance on a ceiling and you should be getting more light out of it. The only thing Revit does good is it won't let you violate some laws of physics. It won't let you do a 200% ceiling reflection, for instance. But you need to understand what you're doing, and garbage in, garbage out really work. So if you can do your computer modeling and understand what Revit or AGI or the other programs are doing for you, then you're on top of the job. And you're not asking a rep to do that for you because they're not being paid to do it. They don't have the time to do it. They'll be glad to do it to your face, and they'll talk about you behind your back. You want to bid the projects fairly. You want the people to make a fair profit on their commission and on the margins. You want to hold specifications against unapproved substitutions and shopping. So that's why you get the manufacturers listed on that unit price list. You don't want the distributor, the contract. I mean, every contractor thinks there's money in the job. and they will try to shop it. If you've got a good relationship with the reps, then they'll call you and tell you what's going on. They're trying to shop or value engineer this, and it's not as possible as it used to be. Contractors should understand what is bid. That means your drawings got to be good, but you got to call your favorite contractors and be sure that they look at the drawings early. They can't accurately put a job together with 2 days if it's a big job, and that will lead to the dependency on lighting packages, which is not necessarily in the best interest of the job, especially if it's, a package that is not approved, and they'll say, well, we'll get it approved. Well, you can't. So tell your contractors that it's coming, tell them it's a big job, or tell them it's a specification oriented job or some other thing, and don't shop the job. Don't let the contractors shop the job. But the more you can communicate with the distributors and the contractors and the reps that this is coming and this is why you did what you did, the better off you'll be. So educate your owners about the need for reasonable design and bid time. You got to educate the owners about using a pre-qualified contractor list if that's allowed. I know there's projects where you can't, and there's projects where you probably should. You got to use the reasons of recognizing expertise in the field. Be sure that the low bid knew that everything's there. What did he forget? Like the parking lot lighting. And you got to educate the owner about what might come at him at value engineering, and why a contractor will come to him and say, well, this office light's $50 a foot, and I can put something in it that's $15 a foot. And I'll give you half that money back, and I'll be able to buy a new white pickup truck. Now, they probably won't say that, but anyway. Lighting is becoming less important to a lot of electrical contractors. They're having the revenue opportunities of voice and data. Lighting is becoming a commodity. I believe that's tragedy. That's you can't get special finishes. You can't get special lumen packages. You even get the modules. They want to have an LED module by a particular company because you're matching all the 3,500 Kelvin lighting in the space. And they may come along and want to put something in there that just doesn't work. And that's why you need to do 3,500 Kelvin can be pretty wild. And the CRI of it, or the TM30 values of it, can be unbelievable. That will lead to more untested manufacturers. Lighting controls are now becoming more code mandated. That's good for us because we need to be able to design these. We need to coordinate them with the lights and with the spaces. And it's now necessary to get code compliance. And so it's a good thing. Lighting knowledge is falling off. I think that especially since we've had so many new people come into our industry, that they're being hired into these distributors and contractors and reps offices, and they need to go get educated. And I believe that the employers should encourage it, give them the time, if not the money. I think that this is, I know that in the classes I teach, most of the people I get are from the agencies and from contractors now. And I think that's really good. But, every time I teach this class, I've got 20 people that are new to the industry. And I'm glad that their employer sees that they need to be educated besides just going off to, Lithonia school. And I believe all of this creates an opportunity for lighting designers because we have the knowledge, we understand the controls, we can evaluate manufacturers, we can evaluate performance. I think that it's a good deal for lighting designers if you can start selling these features to your clients. We know the technology. I've told many of the electrical engineers in my office, how do they stay on top of the energy codes, the fire alarm codes, and all the products that come at them? So let me have the lighting, the lighting controls, and you do this with, and I'll take the lighting off of you. And I think that's another opportunity for lighting designers. But we know the lighting technology. We go to the trade shows, we read the magazines and the technical papers, the literature, energy codes, building codes, lighting ordinances are growing. Most contractors and architects can't or don't keep up with what's going on. Is this creating an opportunity for lighting designers? Absolutely. There's some states that are talking about licensing. I don't know that I blame them, because all of a sudden we're getting into circadian rhythm and emergency lighting. We're getting into serious human factors that a mistake can be unhealthy. And of course, there's lighting certifications from NCQP and IALD and others that try to take the place of some of this licensing. So in conclusion, put your intentions on the documents. Don't say light this room to 50-foot candles with downlights. You can't do that. In fact, you should draw them and draw it to scale so they can pull at their tape and figure out what your spacing was. Be sure your client understands your design, and that you're in charge when it comes back to them for various reasons. Never verbally. Allowance margin for the rep tells me is distributor cost. Mark it up 12% for the distributors, and they're normally happy on a project for that. You have to limit that to 15% of the project, because if it becomes too big of a project, it can start distorting things. Use add delete unit price schedule. That's where we get the contractor to submit the unit price within 40 business hours for every light on the job, and that's where they list the manufacturer. And then I use that same price to add or delete, and we put things like outlets and switches and everything else in there. So we've got a shopping list from the distributor, from the contractor, that we can do all the VE and all the changes, moves and changes on that list. Develop and maintain a reputation for holding your spec. If you don't do anything else on here, but put your intentions on the documents, talk to your client, and get a reputation for holding your spec, you've learned something today. But you need to understand everyone's perspective, help them when you can, so they will help you when you need it. Profit is not a bad word, and you need people to make money, or else they're not going to be in business. And the last thing you want to do is to have a distributor or a contractor or a factory go out of business on your project. It's bad enough when a factory changes lines on your project. I mean, I've kidded the reps here in town that, there's a company called Curlin that seems to change their reps every 2 years. And I would specify them on a job. The submittal would come from a different rep, and the delivery would be a different rep, because it was a big, long high school project. So you see, that gives us heartburn as specifiers, and the contractors grief, because they don't understand what's going on. They'll tell us the company's gone out of business, and we have to tell them, no, you can get it somewhere else. All right. Now, does anybody have any questions?
Got a few here in the chat here, Jody. First one is, what suggestions do you have to prevent a project from being value engineered by a general contractor or an electrical contractor? I know you've gone through a few of those already.
The best way to do it is to make sure the owner understands what you put in the job. And so with the general contractor or the electrical contractor comes to them and says, well, I can save you 20% in the lighting or the lighting controls. The owner's already been through it with you, and they're going to say, how are you going to change it without changing the design? And you let them know that you're approving appropriate products, and that you're allowance bidding things that they can't get but one place, and that you're looking out after the owner. And you need to do that with the owner, because the owner and the architect are where value engineering starts, and you need to cut it off at the pass. Next. Andy?
Andy, you're on mute.
Hey, my mistake. Thank you. Next question is from Shane. Have you used a 2-schedule spec with commodity fixtures on one schedule and spec fixtures on another schedule, where on the first one, commodity fixtures, you're open to pre-approved alternate equals, and in the second case, you're not, in the case of a spec package schedule, essentially?
Yes, I have, and that can work. But what you have to do is get the general contractor to require the electrical contractors to bid them separately. Put them in 2 spec sections, so you can say it's, this is this spec section and this is this spec section. And they need to understand that it will be the sum of the two as bid that will get the job, not the sum of the two as they wish it would be. But if the general contractor and if the architect and then won't put it in the bid documents that way, and the general contractor would put it in his bid documents to the subs that way, that won't work.
In that case, have you listed spec fixture budget prices in the published fixture schedule?
Absolutely. Yeah, I will. That's what I mean by this allowance. I will, if it's a decorative, normally it's decoratives, but it can go other ways. Say we've got to match outdoor lighting for a city standard or something. I'll put that price in the bid documents in this allowance schedule using 12% markup for the distributor and try to limit it to 15% of the dollars of the project, is to not distort it. And that way that dollar is printed out and everybody uses it. It doesn't matter. But I do put, I would put the dollar amount in there, and I wouldn't put it on the fixture schedule. I put it on a separate schedule because I want to use that same dollar amount to add fixtures or delete them if we make changes. But the same, and if they fill out and write their own column in, if I've got one column and they say add and they write another one for delete, I just mark out the delete column because it says in instructions that I will only use the first column. Architects love it if you get them to understand what you're doing there, because they're always worried about being taken advantage of at moves and changes.
Thanks, Jody. Another person is asking, they thought you said that down lights can't deliver 50 foot candles to task, and they're asking what are some other good ways to do that?
No, downlights can deliver 50 foot candles at task. I think what I'm saying is that the flexibility we used to have of putting a multi-wattage or multi-lumen package downlight in a job, and then the architect changes the paint color on the walls, or they go to darker fixture finishes, or they change the use of the room, we might be able to go from a 32-watt compact fluorescent lamp to a 42-watt compact fluorescent lamp and not have to change the fixture. And we don't have that much flexibility with LEDs anymore. So we have to get the intentions from the owner a little firmer, and or put maximum lumens in every fixture and then put a dimmer on every one of them, which certainly you could do, but that would be a commissioning headache if nothing else. So no, you can get downlights with 50 foot candles very easily. I don't know how I said that, but since I say a lot of things, I could have, I guess. Don't mean it, but that's the fluorescent example is what the context that I was saying it in.
That makes sense. Thanks, Jody. Last question that we have here so far. Feel free to keep the questions coming though. With all the parties that are involved in the project these days, from the designer to the architect to the contractor to the owner, what are the best and worst trends in your mind filtering through the lighting industry?
Well, I think one of the best trends filtering through the lighting industry is actually the commissioning business, because we go out on a job, we coordinate the aiming of the lights, the initial setting of the dimming levels and the control zones and the clocks and all the things that the lighting control systems do for us. And the commissioning person will come along and be sure that that's documented and that the owners understand it. And it's good that it's, I feel like I've got an advocate, not an adversary in commissioning, because we put complicated control systems in there. And I want it to do more than it. If it's advanced commissioning through LEED, then you're going to get post-occupancy commissioning that they probably haven't paid us to do. So I think it's a good idea to have a commissioning agent that understands dimming and lighting, lighting controls and lighting. Most of them come from the chemical industry, so they understand thermostats and air pressure, but I like commissioning. One of the worst trends in our industry is everybody thinks they can build an LED downlight or an LED pendant light or an LED strip light. And the things that suffer in those are comfort. They'll put an Alzac reflector or not an Alzac reflector, a white reflector on a downlight, or they'll not understand how to use a cutoff angle in the downlight portion. They'll just put perf holes in an office light or something, and they don't understand why they're there. It doesn't do much good to put a 1-inch hole going all the way down a linear pendant light, because that's not doing what it's supposed to do, which is control glare. And so and of course you can end up with really cheap fixtures that still have flicker. And then you just you made the room a headache factory. So I don't like cheap products. I don't mind good products. I like good products. And I'm very happy to see commissioning.
Fantastic. And to your point, hopefully we see more licensing, state licensing going forward.
Well,
so that's all the questions that we have.
I'm afraid that licensing is the antithesis of red states. In Utah, which if you didn't know is really red, they're removing licensing from barbers and interior designers and landscape designers and all that sort of stuff, or at least talking about it. And they're not talking about licensing anything. But I think a good case could be made for licensing, and certain states have at least entertained or done elements of it, because we really are with circadian lighting. And I don't want to not mention that I think that's an excellent thing too. But with circadian lighting, taking in lighting controls, addressing the human needs in the space, it's like we did in the 60s, where we built all these schools with no windows, and all of a sudden we realized that the students and the teachers were going to sleep in the middle of the day because they didn't have any idea of the sun's position outside. So I think that between circadian lighting and understanding that, and it's not just color, it's also brightness, and it's transitions, and it's all kinds of things. I mean, all you got to do is pick up a copy of any lighting magazine and you'll see at least 1 or 2 articles about the latest and greatest. And then our, egress lighting, emergency lighting is becoming more and more important, if for no other reason than the building officials are learning how to measure it properly. And now we're going to get tested on what we put on a job. So
Couldn't
another
agree
2
more.
cents worth.
Thanks, Jody. Do we have any other questions here? That's all that I'm seeing in the chat here, but I think we're a little over time at this point, so maybe people are starting to drop off. Well, Jody, just wanted to say thanks once again. Couldn't say thanks enough for your time here today and your wonderful presentation. And as I mentioned, we'll be posting this video online here later this week. And Jody will send you a copy of that as well.
Thank you. Well,
have a great evening.
Y'all have a nice summer off, I guess. This is your last meeting, I'm told. And don't forget to come back at the end of the summer, because there'll be more, I'm sure, more interesting seminars and educational opportunities from your section.
Absolutely. We have a great agenda for next year. So keep an eye out in your email for that.
All right. Well, thanks for having me. See y'all later. You'd
Thanks for
never
being
know
here,
I'm from
Jody.
Utah, would you?